You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the Afternoon Agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. Now, this show is all about your opinion and mine. So it's not really news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or really need to be on your agenda. So, with that in mind, here's what we'll be covering today. The funeral of MP Sir David Amos has taken place in his Southend West constituency. He was stabbed to death at a local surgery last month. We'll hear from a local town councillor and get the latest from our reporter, Ellie Costello. A top head teacher says adults should stop mocking young people by calling them woke. Samantha Price, the president of the Girls' School Association, is calling on adults to support the younger generation with their concerns over racism, sexism and climate change. I'll be speaking to her after 4:30. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we need to talk about the arms race. The US, North Korea, China and Russia are all testing nuclear-capable hypersonic missiles, which can potentially evade early warning systems and go 20 times the speed of sound. Scary stuff. That's just a small example of a long list of countries with a growing arsenal of terrifyingly advanced weapons. Should the UK race to keep up in the 21st century arms race? That's the agenda for the next hour, but what's on yours? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon. Mourners have paid their respects to the politician Sir David Amos at a funeral service in his Southend West constituency. The father of 5 was stabbed to death while holding a surgery at Belfair's Methodist Church in Leigh-on-Sea in October. Sir David's coffin, draped in a Union flag, was carried to the church by members of the Southend Fire and Rescue Service. My apologies. Energy provider Bulb has said it's going into administration because of challenging market conditions. The company blamed the rising cost of gas prices and what it calls the volatile market situation, but said it will still provide a normal service to its 1.7 million customers. More than 20 providers have collapsed in recent months following a big rise in the wholesale price of gas. 5 people have died and more than 40 have been injured after a car ploughed through a Christmas parade in the American state of Wisconsin. An SUV broke through barriers in the city of Waukesha yesterday afternoon, hitting dozens of people, including children. One eyewitness said the car was doing 40 miles an hour when it hit the crowd. Police said a person of interest was in custody, but the incident isn't thought to be terror-related. In the UK, all new homes, in England at least, will have to have electric car charging points from next year. The Prime Minister made the announcement at the CBI National Conference earlier today. New supermarkets and workplaces, including those undergoing major renovations, will also be forced to include charging points. Boris Johnson said Britain can win the new green industrial revolution, but only if we act now.
We're regulating so as to require new homes and buildings to have EV charging points, with another 145,000 charging points to be installed thanks to these regulations. We're investing in new projects to turn wind power into hydrogen, and the net zero strategy is expected to trigger about £90 billion of private sector investment, driving the creation of high-wage, high-skilled jobs across the UK.
As you've been hearing, Austria has become the first Western European country to enter a 4th national lockdown to tackle soaring coronavirus cases. Austrians had to stay home and can only leave for essential reasons like food shopping, going to the doctor and going out for exercise. Restaurants and most shops have closed. Large events have been cancelled too. The government says it will re-evaluate the lockdown after 10 days. The government's facing a potential backlash from Tory MPs over changes to social care plans. Previously, the government said there'd be a cap of £86,000 on care costs by 2023, but it's now considering a change to how contributions are calculated. Council funding support will no longer count towards that limit. Under the plans, only an individual's personal payments will be considered. Once the limit is hit, then the local authority will pay. Some backbench MPs say the changes could hit poorer people hardest. The least well-off may have to sell their homes, which would break a Tory manifesto pledge. Australia will begin to allow foreign visitors to enter the country from the start of December. Skilled workers, international students and refugees will be given priority, but they must hold an eligible visa and be fully vaccinated against COVID. The country did have one of the strictest border policies, allowing only a limited number of Australians and permanent residents in before the new rule. And there are warnings to be extra careful during Black Friday, as millions of pounds were lost to scams over Christmas last year. Action Fraud, which is the National Reporting Centre for Fraud and Cybercrime, saw more than 28,000 people conned out of their money during the festive period. That's an increase of 61% compared with the year before. Nearly £2.5 million was lost to criminals during Black Friday and Cyber Monday last year. There's going to be no gendered categories at next year's Brit Awards. Gongs will be awarded for Artist of the Year and International Artist of the Year, replacing the Best Male and Female categories. The show's organisers say the decision will allow musicians to be celebrated purely for their work rather than how they identify. You're up to date. I'm back in half an hour.
This programme comes with a serious health warning. It may render you a nervous wreck. So if you are of delicate disposition, take a deep breath. Because in top security facilities around the world, weapons are being created to wipe out humanity, and at a rate faster than the world has ever witnessed. If you thought that the arms race and Star Wars weapons were a relic from the Cold War era, where most of the world quaked on a cliff edge of constant existential threat, think again. Russia has been blowing up satellites in space. China has created a nuclear missile that can rip around the world at hypersonic speed, and reports of sonic waves being deployed to fry people's brains are being both debunked and manically investigated at the same time. We are right back in the throes of a global arms race, and the weapons of war being developed are more terrifying than ever before. If there's one thing the pandemic should have taught us, it's that accidents can have catastrophic consequences. If the unproven theories are true and COVID was a laboratory-made virus, we should be grateful that the pathogen was as mild as it is, despite reaching every corner of the planet and claiming millions of lives. Imagine a scenario where what was unleashed was weapons-grade biological warfare designed to obliterate troops of fighting fitness. Lockdowns would be an apocalyptic last resort. Having exited the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty to halt the arms race, the US has been developing defence systems against intercontinental ballistic missiles for decades, a concerted effort that the West's adversaries perceive as aggression and are now scrambling to outstrip, developing a chilling arsenal to hedge against the possibility that America could strike first, but be impervious to a retaliatory attack. Today, 14,000 nuclear weapons are stored, while the world now counts officially 9 nuclear-armed states. Tensions are significantly rising. A major arms race is on, with concern within the United Nations over a lack of any serious effort to stop it. In February, Biden and Putin agreed to extend the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, yet both are locked in a mad scramble to develop warheads where miscalculation in a crisis would effectively end the world. Without intervention, a perilous build-up of weapons of mass destruction has once again gripped the planet, with America, China and Russia all rapidly participating. The UK and France are also modernising their arsenals, while Pakistan, India, Iran and North Korea, to name but a few, are also tooling up with hideous ordnance. America alone reputedly spends more than $700 billion on its military budget and is developing state-of-the-art hardware, while also giving nuclear submarine technology to Australia for serious presence in the South China Sea. This who blinks first grotesque mutually assured destruction is only just underway, with diminishing checks and balances. A current must-have munition is hypersonic missiles, with China having tested a new warhead capable of carrying a nuclear bomb around the Earth, while Russia has developed 2 such formidable arms, with one that can fly at 20 times the speed of sound. The planet would be rubble within the time it takes to say the word stop. Meanwhile, mysterious reports into outbreaks of strange symptoms allegedly brought on by a piercing, high-pitched sound have led experts to question whether Havana Syndrome, claimed by more than 200 US diplomatic, military and intelligence personnel worldwide, is a deadly threat or the stuff of science fiction. Yet the fear is so great that the CIA director has appointed the undercover spy who spearheaded the hunt for bin Laden to investigate. Then, just last week, Russia blew up one of its own satellites, showering the International Space Station with debris, demonstrating its ability to destroy vital communications and GPS systems, providing crucial choreography to territorial warfare on Earth. Oh, I pray you sleep well tonight, viewers, because today we really need to talk about the 21st century arms race. Joining me first is former senior military intelligence officer and friend of the show, Philip Ingram, MBE. Philip, modern warfare does seem to be rapidly evolving. Tell us more about that. How concerned should we be?
Well, we're hearing a lot of things that sound good in Hollywood, but the reality and the practicalities are very different. I would argue the arms race in the 20th century was much more dangerous than that in the 21st century. But we are still hearing these sensational accounts of the hypersonic missile, the potential for biological weapons, sound weapons. The practicalities behind a lot of these don't match the hype that they're getting as well. However, the worrying things are the destruction of the satellite in space, but even more worrying should be the development of some of our conventional military capabilities that are out there, because there are certain nations, especially in the South China Seas area, developing what are called power projection capabilities, and they're changing political wherewithal to use those. And that's probably more dangerous than these highly sophisticated weapons. There's always been an arms race. There's always been a technological race.
Yeah, it's a continuation of a familiar narrative, especially to those brought up during the Cold War period. But we have different players joining the game now, don't we? Players such as China. And I think the Pentagon are especially concerned about how fast the Chinese are able to evolve their arsenal and create weapons that could possibly evade intervention.
They are. China's been on a rapid program over the last few years of professionalizing their military, re-equipping their military with sophisticated capabilities, developing what is called power projection capability. So we've got submarines, we've got aircraft carriers, we've got marine capability, the ability to take Chinese influence, take it somewhere else in the world and project that power from a military perspective. That's the worrying bit. And then highly sophisticated and technical weapons, they're rush into space and everything else. Now, from a US perspective, from an allied perspective, are we going to admit that we can see them whenever they're doing things and can track them as they're doing it? It's much better that we get out in the public domain that we can't see them. We don't know what's going on. The Chinese are very good at acquiring other people's intellectual property. So a lot of the research behind this new technology, they have taken from other universities and other military technological establishments around the globe. That's what they're particularly good at.
I mean, what's the risk here of power projection bleeding into an actual disaster? Because the Chinese have struck up some fairly unsavoury friendships over the years with countries such as North Korea, who don't exactly seem to be a picture of modernity and stability. And they've got involvement with Afghanistan and the Taliban. There are allegations that they are building a close relationship with other countries in the Middle East. These are all very well-recognised foes of the West. If these countries all end up with sophisticated capabilities, can we trust that one of them isn't going to press the button?
Well, the pressing the button is the final bit. China's developing things from an economic perspective. They own large chunks of Africa. All of our electronic devices that we've got, your phones, your cameras, your cars, your sophisticated weapons, all rely on rare earth metals. The Chinese control 90% of the supply of those around the globe. They can influence what can be made and what can't be, and they've got a much greater economic influence globally than they have military influence. But they are growing that because they're growing their global interest across the board. But it's not just them, it's also the relationship they have with the likes of Russia. And if we look at Vladimir Putin, he has exercised his power projection capability by annexing Crimea and supporting the rebels in the eastern part of Ukraine. And the threat that he's putting in both into Ukraine with the exercise going on at the moment and supporting what's going on in Belarus and pushing people as a weapon across, trying to push them into Poland to destabilize Europe is frightening. And it's bringing all of these things together that makes the globe a much more unstable place.
Yeah, I mean, we have heard the Chinese are repeatedly doing exercises around Taiwan. Russia, as you said, are amassing troops on the border with the Ukraine again. And we have said in Britain, if China goes into Taiwan, we would act, as has America. We haven't been as vociferous, I don't believe, when it comes to the situation concerning Ukraine. But if these countries did decide to conduct some form of invasion or annexation, and we did step in and want to put boots on the ground, what could result of that?
Well, I think politically we'd see a very stiff letter written by the Prime Minister and the President and possibly elements of the United Nations. Of course, China and Russia are permanent members of the Security Council, so there'd never be a Security Council resolution that would undermine what they're doing. Militarily, we can show that we have a capability. And it's no accident that HMS Queen Elizabeth carried out her first deployment down into the South China Seas and sailed through there, showing China what was going on. That was for two reasons. One, to demonstrate to China that there's resolve in the region. The second was to actually see what China's response would be so that we could gather intelligence against the Chinese as to what their reactions are. The one advantage we have over the Chinese is that they don't have any recent combat experience. They don't have that ability in understanding how to bring all of the elements together, whereas British forces, US forces and all the rest of it have been virtually in combat situations for since the start of the Second World War. I think there's been 1 year since then that we haven't actually been involved in a conflict.
Well, I hope you're right, and that plays in our favour if anything does go a bit west. Philip Ingram, MBE, always delighted to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your insights. Well, let's now go live to Washington, D.C. I'm joined by Elizabeth Bohr, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Elizabeth, much of your work focuses on modern deterrence against emerging forms of aggression. Is advanced weaponry, like physical weapons like missiles and guns, or does it go deeper than that?
Well, they are certainly a new threat to our countries, but a new threat in the sense that it's better technology, better weaponry than we have seen before. But I think an even more significant development in the past few years, and especially in the past few months, is the use of non-military weapons as a tool to weaken our societies. And we're seeing it at the moment at the Polish border with Belarus very vividly and very dramatically. And that's what I think we need to be concerned about most of all, because with new weapons, we have similar capabilities ourselves, even though you could say, well, maybe they're not as good, but we have some sort of capabilities. With these new threats, we have basically no way of defending ourselves, because it's so different from the way we have usually thought about conflict and wars.
Hypersonic missiles and blowing up satellites. What of things such as bio-warfare, chemical warfare, cyber warfare?
Well, it all blends together, right? And that's the point, or the reason why countries such as Russia and China and now even Belarus use these what you might call innovative forms of aggression, because you can use a whole range, and the only limit you have is the limit of your imagination, which is why somebody like Alexander Lukashenko, leader of Belarus, self-declared president of Belarus, could, even though he doesn't have very strong armed forces, even though he doesn't have a lot of money, his country doesn't have a lot of money, he could then turn to a completely new form of aggression, i.e. migrants, or weaponizing migrants. But when it comes to what else we could expect, I think we should be concerned about weaponization of viruses, for example. So what if, now in this case, as we have seen with COVID, it was Mother Nature, I think we can all conclude it was Mother Nature who came up with the virus, and then it spread very quickly. But what if a country decided to use a virus and as a resulting epidemic as a threat against other countries? So that's something we need to be concerned about. And I know Bill Gates, for example, has warned about that recently as well. So a very new form of aggression, and one that, again, we are not really set up to deal with, because it involves more than governments. It involves citizens knowing what to do.
It seems to me that we're again in an era of mass proliferation of weaponry. When I'd done my research and looked at how much the US are spending on modernising warfare, and when you look at recent newspaper reports of experiments being carried out by Russia, by China, the braggadocio of North Korea, onwards and onwards, it seems to me that everything's escalating and beginning to rapidly pick up pace, but there don't seem to be the same sort of checks and balances or big public conversations about this. Is that something that concerns you?
Well, I think the big concern that I have is that we have been spoiled during 30 years of peace here in the West, and indeed in large parts of the world. So we in the West, meaning NATO countries, EU member states, North America, we are so used to not having to worry about national security. We are so used to outsourcing every national security concern to people wearing uniform. But now, as we have seen, the threats that we have to worry about, that we have to tackle, are not just the sort of threats that the armed forces can sort out. It's threats that we as citizens and that we as the wider civil society have to play a role in tackling, or otherwise we have no chance. And for example, with the Colonial Pipeline incident in the US in May, now it was a criminal gang that perpetrated it, but it could have equally been a state-sponsored gang, and it brought down the whole East Coast, not just the incident itself, but the fact that people panicked. So if we think about that, it's these things will happen again. What is the role of society in trying to at least soften the blow of such aggression. And that's where I think with her, there is enormous work that can be done and that should be done. And the good news is that everybody, I think, would agree that doing their part is in their interest. And as a result, our societies will be better set up. Nobody will say, well, I'd better make the situation worse. No, because we all want complete convenience in our societies. And that's what we can build on.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me. Elizabeth Boyle, security expert and columnist. Now, lecturer in war studies at King's College London, Dr. Zeno Leone also joins me. When we look at potential peril here in the UK, who and what are our biggest threats?
Well, when you look at threats, there are so many out there, and that's the challenge, because you need to try to prioritize in order to develop a coherent strategy for the future and to set up the right kind of procurement, military procurement that you need. I think looking at the integrated review of Boris Johnson's government, published in March 2021, the priority is great powers relations, and so in particular UK-China relations. I think it was very prominent the fact that China was described as the greatest economic threat to British economic security. And this wasn't only in the UK. If we look at the most recent national security strategies in the US, in India, and in other countries, clearly great power competition is back in fashion, is really the priorities at the top of the list of these countries. And that's why this government has also been pushing for an increase of nuclear warheads.
It seems to me that when you say it's all about, the big powers sort of, flaunting their wares on the world stage, this concept of power projection is leading to a sort of a speeding up of proliferation of extremely dangerous arms. Is that something that countries in Europe, countries like the UK, need to be involved in to make sure that there is this threat of mutually assured destruction? Or should, as a world, we be sitting down, as the UN often recommends, and having a sensible dialogue about reducing the amount of disastrous armaments that we're stockpiling?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say that I think what is currently happening with what you call a new arm race is it's certainly a new stage in the arm race, but it's very much about some of the great powers, especially China and Russia, trying to make some breakthroughs, to leapfrog, to skip stages of development in order to catch up in areas where they're still behind, especially China. Militarily speaking, is behind in several areas, and so it tries to catch up with investing in artificial intelligence or hypersonic missiles. But actually, this sort of race, in my view, hides a lot of weaknesses when it comes to these rising great powers. Anyway, to answer your question, I think if you're not able, and when I say you, I mean the UK, if somebody is unable to keep at the top of that game of the arm race, which is undesirable anyway, but if you're unable to keep up at the top of the game, I think it's definitely better to invest in a diplomacy for peace. For example, to train your diplomats, to get to know your opponents, the strategic culture of your opponents. Only very recently, we knew very little about China, as several governmental sources have acknowledged. So promoting those summits, those spaces where there can be some transparency, where we can kind of understand what exactly these great powers want and maybe come down to an agreement, is very difficult to do at this stage, because we're going through a transition towards a new world order, which means that the old balance of power is being disrupted, and there is not a world leader that is capable of leading this process, this diplomacy for peace. So that's why it's very challenging.
Dr. Zeno Leone, thank you so much. Fascinating stuff. Lecturer in War Studies there at King's College London. There you are, transitioning to a new world order, he says, and a frightening one it could be too. We're going to be continuing this conversation throughout the show, and I want to know what you think. Does this stuff terrify you, or did you grow up during the Cold War and you're just used to it by now? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can also tweet me @gbnews, and as per usual, there's a poll up right now asking, should the UK be investing more in advanced weaponry? Cast your vote so I know what you, the nation, really thinks. After the break, the funeral of MP Sir David Amos has taken place in his Southend West constituency. He was stabbed to death at a local surgery last month. We'll get the latest from our reporter Ellie Costello, but first it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A taste of winter later this week, but for the time being, many places are enjoying plenty of late autumn fine weather. Sunny spells, showers for some, mainly around the periphery of the area of high pressure that is keeping things generally settled across the UK. But it's really into, well, the far southeast of England where we're seeing a steady stream of showers for Kent, 1 or 2 showers also for the rest of the day for parts of Norfolk and Lincolnshire, and that thicker cloud that we've seen through the day across northern Scotland continuing to bring some light outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Away from the cloudier areas in the north and the east, clear skies through the night and temperatures falling away, a touch of frost in places by the start of tomorrow morning. A few fog patches as well, but they won't last particularly long, and actually plenty of sunny skies once again. Northern England into the Midlands, Wales and the southwest. This area of cloud making an appearance, a bit more cloud across central and southeastern parts of the UK compared to Monday, and thicker cloud also for southern Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland. Again, those light showers continuing for the northwest of Scotland. But for most, it's another dry, fine, settled day, where we get some sunshine, feeling pleasant with light winds and highs of 10 Celsius. Into the evening then, clear skies coming and going across the southern half of the UK, and where we get those clear skies, some dense fog patches forming. Also a touch of frost. But towards the northwest, an area of rain arrives overnight. That rain pushing through Scotland as well as Northern Ireland as we start off Wednesday. So frost-free in the north, colder further south with that fog and low cloud as we begin things. It does brighten up a bit across England and Wales. The cloud lifts, the fog clears. But it stays cloudier, I think, in many places compared to, say, for example, Tuesday and Monday. By later this week, the weather turns windier, colder and much more unsettled.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to the afternoon agenda with me, Alex Phillips. In a few moments, we'll head to Southend as mourners pay their respects to MP Sir David Amos. But first, let's get the latest news headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon. As you've been hearing, mourners have been paying their respects to the politician Sir David Amos during a funeral service and procession in his Southend West constituency. Sir David's coffin, draped with a Union flag, was carried to the church by members of Southend Fire and Rescue Service. The father of five was stabbed to death while holding a surgery at Belfair's Methodist Church in Leigh-on-Sea in October. More on that later on. In other news, the Home Secretary says people smugglers could face a life sentence in the UK. Priti Patel is taking urgent questions from MPs in the Commons over the increasing numbers of migrants crossing the English Channel. It comes after it was announced more than 24,700 people have arrived in the UK so far this year. That's almost 3 times more than last year. Energy provider Bulb has said it's going into administration following challenging market conditions. The company blamed the rising cost of gas prices and what it calls volatile market situations, but said it will provide service as normal to its 1.7 million customers. More than 20 providers have collapsed in recent months following a big rise in the price of wholesale gas. And in the United States, 5 people have died and more than 40 more have been injured after a car ploughed into a Christmas parade in the American state of Wisconsin. US police are investigating whether the suspect was fleeing another crime scene. An SUV broke through barriers in the city of Waukesha yesterday afternoon, hitting dozens of people, including children. And here, all new homes in England will have electric car charging points from next year. Boris Johnson has been speaking to business industry leaders at the CBI National Conference from the Port of Tyne in South Shields. New supermarkets and workplaces, including those undergoing major renovations, will also be forced to include charging points. You're up to date. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
One of the top head teachers in the UK is urging us to stop mocking young people by calling them woke for standing up for things that they believe in. Samantha Price, president of the Girls' School Association, says parents and teachers should keep up with the younger generation instead. Well, Samantha joins me now. Samantha, delighted to have you on. It's really fascinating reading your article in the newspapers this morning. Why do you feel that the older generations look down on the younger generations for their thoughts and ideologies?
That's a very good question. Good evening and good to see you. I think that it's a lack of understanding. There's always going to be a degree of lack of understanding between different generations. There's nothing new there. I think that we're seeing a very rapid pace of change at the moment, but internationally, not just in the UK, in terms of what young people are feeling very sort of passionately about. And the new language around equality and diversity has emerged very, very quickly, which the older generation are finding harder, I think, to understand and come to terms with, which is why words such as wokeness, for example, or woke, have tended to be distorted and perhaps misunderstood in how they're being used.
But is there potentially a limit to some of these novel ideologies, let's call them, in terms of there's a lot of parents out there who are concerned when people are talking a lot about gender self-identification, for example, to young people at a young age and the effect that's having on children? Or are these topics that they might make someone of my age feel uncomfortable or my parents' age feel uncomfortable, but these conversations should be happening?
I mean, I think these are uncomfortable conversations. They're certainly different conversations, certainly to those that we had as we were growing up. But I think the fact of the matter is the world is changing and society is changing, and we can't ignore that. What we have to do, I think, as the old generation, is we have to understand where young people are coming from. And I think if we take the time to understand the language and understand the motivations behind what it is they're calling for, then actually we can support them far better. I think if we end up being in conflict with them through a lack of understanding, that's actually when we're going to see more problems.
Though, for adults to mediate in some of these things. I mean, for example, when we talk about certain movements and activism, certainly across the Atlantic, they seem to be extremely polarising, perhaps when played out through the very divisive realms of social media. And, there are potentially other examples where young people are getting concerned at a very young age about issues of identity politics that, people of my age didn't have to worry about. And perhaps that could be having a deleterious effect on their mental well-being.
Yeah, so I think that's where I think our role as educators is so important, because we have to be having conversations with young people about some of these issues from a young age, and obviously sort of making it age appropriate, particularly if you think about all of the context around relationships and positive relationships, which has been prevalent over the last 12 months. But I think that the more that we are sort of guiding young people to have sensible conversations and sensible debate, and also to learn to be able to listen to different viewpoints, then actually the better outcomes that we can have. I think that if as school leaders we're ignoring it and we're not addressing it, then actually we are going to be in a situation where there's a considerable amount of misunderstanding.
Do you ever have the feeling that perhaps at the moment in, year 2021, we're rushing young people to have very adult thoughts and ideas and discussions, and that potentially that sort of innocence of childhood is being sacrificed on the altar of adult ultra-liberalisation?
Well, I think what's interesting is actually this is being driven by the teenage generation. It's not actually being driven by adults. And I think that what we have to do is that we have to respond to that, and then we have to, in an age-appropriate way, we have to provide the framework to enable them to be able to generate the level of understanding that they need if they want to be able to implement the changes that they're wanting. I've been in education for 25 years, and in terms of a generation, this generation have got far more momentum and conviction about the way that they would like to see society evolve as they emerge into adulthood, and we simply can't ignore that.
We mustn't ignore it. Is there a risk that perhaps we give them too many authorial credits over the way society should develop? Because at the end of the day, they are minors. They haven't lived and experienced things in the same way that adults have, and therefore aren't necessarily the best equipped at making big decisions like that.
Well, I think that's where we need to educate them. We need to make sure that they are informed. We need to ensure that our curriculum is giving them enough balance to be able to understand the context of where we've come from as a society, so that they are in a position in an informed way to be able to take the decisions that they need to. I mean, if you take sort of topics such as climate change, they are inheriting the climate. They have got to take responsibility for the goals that we have set. COP26, for example, we've got to looking for net zero for 2050. They're the ones who are going to have to take this forwards. So therefore, we've got to equip them and give them the confidence to be able to do this.
Samantha, it's been lovely talking today. Thank you so much. It's really great to have your perspective. That's Samantha Price, who's president of the Girls' School Association. She says, stop calling young people woke. Perhaps we should stop and listen to them. After the break, we'll bring you an update from our reporter Ellie Costello, who has been in Southend today at the funeral of MP Sir David Amos. We'll be back in just a moment. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. A private funeral service for MP Sir David Amos has taken place in his Southend West constituency, ahead of a service at Westminster Cathedral tomorrow. The father of 5 who was stabbed to death while holding a constituency surgery at Belfairs Methodist Church in Leigh-on-Sea last month was a devout Catholic. Our South East of England reporter Ellie Costello sent us this report from Southend.
It's been an emotional day, an important day for the people of Southend, saying goodbye to their much loved and much respected public servant, Sir David Amos. And I'm outside St Mary's Church in Prittlewell, where that funeral service took place at about 1 p.m. this afternoon. Now, we are told that it was at capacity. 450 people came to the service. That was family, friends and local representatives of groups that Sir David Amos cared so much about. We saw cadets, we saw some of the scouts, the firefighters. The local firefighter service actually carried in the coffin ever so gently into the church behind us. The streets here were packed with people that all fell silent when the coffin was carried in. And as the coffin came into the churchyard, a round of applause broke out with the public that was standing in the streets, which I think is testament to just how much of a loved character Sir David was. And the church service was being played out on loudspeakers for the public that was gathered in the streets around, and people were here to listen to what was being said inside. People were even singing along to the hymns. And the service actually started with a statement from the family of Sir David Amos. It was read by family friend and former MP Anne Widdecombe, and in that statement she read aloud, this is what the family said. They said, as a family, we are trying to understand why this awful thing has occurred. Nobody should die in that way. Nobody. They said, please let some good come from this tragedy. We are absolutely broken, but we will survive and carry on for a wonderful and inspiring man. So those are the words there of the family of Sir David Amos, which was read in a statement at the beginning of the funeral service. And another close friend of Sir David Amos, Mark Francois, who's the MP for Rayleigh, which is neighbouring to Southend, he was given the honour of delivering the eulogy at today's service. I spoke to him just before the funeral service got underway, and this is what he told me.
I'm going to do my best to do David justice. If I can do that, then hopefully it'll have been worth my turning up. And I just want to try and, explain to people in the church what kind of a man he was, why you've seen this outpouring of love for the guy, and maybe throw in a couple of light-hearted anecdotes, because whenever you talk about David, inevitably there's an element of humour. He was a bit of a legend, really, and I'm going to try and explain why I say that, and why I think he'll be remembered for an extremely long time.
If it's anything like the way you spoke in the comments, I'm sure it'll be very emotional and a touch of humour in there as well. And you touched there upon the way he will be remembered by you. How will he be remembered by this town? And what legacy does he leave behind?
Well, you're standing in the legacy. Because of David, before long, this will be the city of Southend. And he was asked by a local newspaper, The Echo, about a year ago, how are you going to make Southend a city? And he said, I'm going to wear them down. I'm just going to keep going until they give in. And he won in the end. So Southend being a city forever will be part of David's legacy.
Really beautiful words from a very close friend of Sir David. So that procession stopped outside the Civic Centre in Southend, that beautiful horse-drawn carriage with 4 black horses, which was very gently taking the coffin of Sir David through the streets of Southend, the town he loved so much, that he spent 20 years campaigning for it to become a city. And in October, the Queen granted Southend city status, so it was very fitting that that horse-drawn carriage took the coffin of Sir David through the streets of Southend for the public to say goodbye. So tomorrow is a much bigger political funeral service. It's taking part at Westminster Cathedral. I'm sure we're going to see politicians from across all parties turning up at that service. Sir David was a very popular cross-party politician, although of course he was traditionally and very much a Conservative MP. But today was about the private funeral service. This was about Sir David's family and friends, and it was about the public saying goodbye to a very much loved and very much respected public servant.
GB News correspondent Ellie Costello. Now, after the break, do vaccine passports work as an incentive to get jabbed? One of Nicola Sturgeon's COVID advisors says there's absolutely no evidence that they do. I'll be talking it through with psychotherapist Lucy Beresford next. First, it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A taste of winter later this week, but for the time being, many places are enjoying plenty of late autumn fine weather. Sunny spells, showers for some, mainly around the periphery of the area of high pressure that is keeping things generally settled across the UK. But it's really into, well, the far southeast of England where we're seeing a steady stream of showers for Kent, 1 or 2 showers also for the rest of the day for parts of Norfolk and Lincolnshire, and that thicker cloud that we've seen through the day across northern Scotland continuing to bring some light outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Away from the cloudier areas in the north and the east, clear skies through the night and temperatures falling away, a touch of frost in places by the start of tomorrow morning. A few fog patches as well, but they won't last particularly long, and actually plenty of sunny skies once again. Northern England into the Midlands, Wales and the southwest. This area of cloud making an appearance, a bit more cloud across central and southeastern parts of the UK compared to Monday, and thicker cloud also for southern Scotland, Northern England, Northern Ireland. Again, those light showers continuing for the northwest of Scotland. But for most, it's another dry, fine, settled day, where we get some sunshine, feeling pleasant with light winds and highs of 10 Celsius. Into the evening then, clear skies coming and going across the southern half of the UK, and where we get those clear skies, some dense fog patches forming. Also a touch of frost. But towards the northwest, an area of rain arrives overnight. That rain pushing through Scotland as well as Northern Ireland as we start off Wednesday. So frost-free in the north, colder further south with that fog and low cloud as we begin things. It does brighten up a bit across England and Wales. The cloud lifts, the fog clears. But it stays cloudier, I think, in many places compared to, say, for example, Tuesday and Monday. By later this week, the weather turns windier, colder and much more unsettled.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. The Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has branded people who refuse to be vaccinated against COVID without good reason as deeply irresponsible. But one of her COVID advisors says there's absolutely no evidence that vaccine passports have increased the number of people getting jabbed. So what does go through our minds when thinking about getting a vaccine, and what would work as an incentive? Psychotherapist and broadcaster Lucy Beresford joins me now. Lucy, we've seen protests across the world against mandatory vaccination. Why do you think people feel so strongly about this?
Well, quite a lot of the recent protests have actually been in a particular part of the world that has had in its recent past to deal with very totalitarian governments. And there is a theory that those populations in particular are resisting something very specific around whether they feel that the government speaks to them truthfully and whether they can trust the information that they're given. So that is a very interesting analysis of one particular cohort of protesters. I think more generally, when we are looking at something like vaccines or vaccine passports or how many people ought to get the booster, we are splitting into two camps. The people who think, yep, this is information that I can trust and I feel that it's doing the right thing for society and therefore I'm going to go along with it. And other people who feel very resistant, but for a variety of reasons. It could be that they don't trust the government. It could be that they really value bodily autonomy, or it could be that they want to be very contrary. And so it's hard to necessarily say explicitly why people have that mentality or they resist actually taking a vaccine, but it is largely to do with very deeply held beliefs.
Is there a risk then that making something mandatory actually feeds into that sense of suspicion, that sense of protecting one's own agency?
Not necessarily. What we've seen in the past is that, for example, if you wanted to work in a medical setting, as myself, I once did, you had to have a hepatitis B vaccine. If you wanted to travel to certain countries in the world, you needed to have a yellow fever vaccine. And that didn't seem to result in very much pushback. And those were situations that were in place for a very long time. I think what has happened is that because the pandemic itself was such a novelty and it threw up so many unanswered questions for so many people on so many different levels of their lives, that people suddenly felt much more unstable. It wasn't just a clear message, get the Hep B jab or don't work in this hospital. It was a situation that gave rise to a lot more ideas around, is this truthful? Is this information that I can really trust? And what a lot of people have done is, instead of perhaps following the crowd because we are very imitative creatures, instead of following the crowd and saying, yes, I'm just going to follow this through, what we've seen is a large cohort of, a large minority of people who band together and find support in believing that there are other people who feel the same way as them. And that always makes us feel much safer, much more secure if we feel that other people corroborate our worldview.
Do you think perhaps one of the problems here is that people have not been told something that looks like a clear narrative thread? So, first of all, we're told vaccines would be the way out of this. Then we were told that vaccine didn't actually stop transmission. We've seen all sorts of statistics over how risky COVID is to someone personally, depending on their age and demographic. And then, essentially now we're being told, well, you do need to have the vaccine. And there's been a lot of political game playing about the safety of the vaccine, particularly the AstraZeneca vaccine. So out of this smorgasbord of concepts and ideas and news headlines and government messaging, people are picking and choosing what fits their own narratives.
Yes, really, clarity of message was always going to be the most important thing about this. I mean, I know vaccines are important, but it's the messaging around them that also really determines what the uptake will be. And we saw that at the very beginning of the UK's first lockdown. The messaging was really clear: stay at home, save lives, protect the NHS. Whether you agreed with that or not, that was the messaging. It was very unequivocal. As you say, in the following 20 months, we have just had so many messages, and we've had so many different pieces of information from around the world in terms of vaccine efficacy and how long it lasts. And we are actually in an evolving situation. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. It's just a question of whether you trust the messenger, whether you actually believe what somebody is saying to you, but actually does the person who's saying it, whether it's a politician or a government body, do they have credibility in your eyes? And unfortunately, if you don't have that, the messaging, particularly if it's very fluid or very incoherent, is going to be almost worse than useless.
Lucy, thank you so much for coming on and demystifying some of the psychology behind vaccines. Lucy Beresford there, who's a psychotherapist and a broadcaster. You're watching The Afternoon Agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, and there's lots more still to come, so don't go anywhere. Hello and welcome. If you've just joined The Afternoon Agenda, we're creeping up on 5 o'clock. I'm Alex Phillips, and this show is all about what I think, what you think, and what my guests think. So it's not really news as you know it, but discussion and in-depth debate on things that are or really need to be on your agenda. Still to come this hour, what impact does the digital world and technology have on you? I'll be speaking to the author of The Future of You to discuss the fate of the human race in a digital world. The Southend funeral of murdered MP Sir David Amos has taken place. Mourners gathered to pay their respects at the service and procession. I'll be speaking to Vice Chairman of the Leigh-on-Sea Town Council, who knew Sir David very well. And it may not be on the agenda of traditional news outlets, but we need to talk about the arms race. China's been testing nuclear-capable hypersonic missiles, Russia is blowing up satellites in space, and hundreds of American emissaries have reported a strange condition purportedly created by super stealth sonic weapons. Welcome to the 21st century arms race. Should the UK be pushing to keep up? That's the agenda for the next hour, but what's on yours? You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines with Polly.
Thank you, Alex. Your news at 5 o'clock. As you've been hearing, mourners have been paying their last respects to the politician Sir David Amos at a funeral service in his Southend West constituency today. The father of 5 was stabbed to death while holding a surgery at Belfair's Methodist Church in Leigh-on-Sea in October. Sir David's coffin, draped with a Union flag, was carried to the church by members of Southend Fire and Rescue Service. The Home Secretary says there's no silver bullet for solving the migrant crisis. Priti Patel is taking urgent questions from MPs in the Commons over the increasing numbers of people crossing the English Channel. The Shadow Home Secretary, Nick Thomas-Simons, accused the Home Secretary of empty rhetoric and broken promises. It comes after it was announced more than 24,700 people have arrived in the UK so far this year. That's almost 3 times more than in 2020.
There's no single solution to fixing a global migration crisis. The Nationalising Borders Bill going through Parliament will actually make life harder for the criminal gangs behind these crossings, and all members should be supporting that. That means people smugglers could face a life behind bars, and importantly, this will break the deadly business models of these smugglers. And in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, of course, we want to make sure that the United Kingdom is less attractive to illegal migrants.
Well, the Home Secretary's also made the announcement as to who's to head the Sarah Everard inquiry. Dame Ailish Angelini QC will be investigating her murder, which was by a serving police officer. Priti Patel says she hopes the inquiry will shine a light on the failings that led to Sarah's killing in March. Energy provider Bulb has said it's going into administration because of challenging market conditions. The company blamed the rising cost of gas prices and what it calls the volatile market situation, but said it will still provide a normal service to its 1.7 million customers. More than 20 providers have collapsed in recent months following a big rise in the wholesale price of gas. In the United States, 5 people have died and more than 40 more have been injured after a car ploughed through a Christmas parade in the American state of Wisconsin. An SUV broke through barriers in the city of Waukesha on yesterday afternoon, hitting dozens of people, including children. One eyewitness said the car was doing 40 miles an hour when it hit the crowd. Police said a person of interest was now in custody, but the incident is not thought to be terror-related. Here, all new homes in England will have to have electric car charging points from next year. Boris Johnson made the announcement at the CBI National Conference earlier on today. New supermarkets and workplaces, including those undergoing major renovations, will also be forced to include charging points. The Prime Minister says Britain can win the new green industrial revolution, as he calls it, but only if we act now.
We're regulating so as to require new homes and buildings to have EV charging points, with another 145,000 charging points to be installed thanks to these regulations. We're investing in new projects to turn wind power into hydrogen, and the net zero strategy is expected to trigger about £90 billion of private sector investment, driving the creation of high-wage, high-skilled jobs across the UK.
Boris Johnson. So Austria then has become the first Western European country to enter a 4th national lockdown to try to tackle soaring coronavirus cases. Austrians have to stay home and can only leave for essential reasons like food shopping, going to the doctor or going out for exercise. Restaurants and most shops have closed. Large events have also been cancelled, and the government says it will re-evaluate the lockdown after 10 days. Here, the government's facing a potential backlash from Tory MPs over changes to social care plans. Previously, the government said there'd be a cap of £86,000 on care costs by 2023. But it's now considering a change to how contributions are calculated. Council funding will no longer count towards that limit. Under the plans, only an individual's personal payments will be considered. Once the limit is hit, the local authority will then pay in. Some backbench MPs say the changes could hit poorer people hardest, the least well off having to sell their homes, which would break a Tory manifesto pledge. Australia will begin to allow foreign visitors to enter the country from the start of December. Skilled workers, international students and refugees will be given priority, but they must hold an eligible visa and be fully vaccinated against COVID. The country did have one of the strictest border policies in the world, allowing only a limited number of Australians and permanent residents in before the new rules. There'll be no gendered categories at next year's Brit Awards. Gongs will be awarded for Artist of the Year and International Artist of the Year, replacing Best Male and Best Female categories. The show's organisers say the decision will allow musicians to be celebrated purely for their work rather than how they identify. That's it. I'm back in half an hour with more news. See you then.
I can remember as a child being beguiled by the Bond film, You Only Live Twice. Space rockets that could gobble up other space rockets being launched out of fake volcanoes in Japan as Blofeld stroked his manic-looking white cat surrounded by a moat of deadly piranhas. It all felt like phantasmagoric stuff, but was in keeping with the petrifying fears of the age as the globe was gripped by the Cold War, the destruction of all humanity at the push of a button. It would not be hyperbolic to say we are back in an era of mass proliferation of some of the deadliest and most ghoulish weapons imaginable, from biowarfare, underscored by the outbreak of a potentially modified pathogen that could have plausibly leaked from a lab, to cyber conflict, hypersonic missiles, exploding satellites, chemical weapons, and nuclear submarines. If you thought that de-escalation had been set in train at the fabled establishment of a big red telephone between Washington and Moscow, think again. The race is on, and it's more harrowing than ever before. Well, let's speak to Senior Fellow for Naval Warfare and Advanced Technology at the Heritage Foundation, Brent Sadler. Brent, what's your assessment of the West's military strength and capability today in light of a lot of front pages over here in the UK talking about China's capabilities in developing things like hypersonic weaponry?
Oh, yes. Well, thank you for having me on today. It's not necessarily a new arms race. It's definitely been going on for at least 15 to 20 years. And there have been some very troubling developments, especially with the space launch or the fragmentary orbital weapon that the Chinese just recently tested. But this actually is part of a larger comprehensive effort of the Chinese to match and outpace the US and its allies in East Asia. And of course, Russia doing very similarly in the Eastern European area, but the Black Sea and Ukraine most notably.
Is there a risk here that, Joe Biden, I understand, is spending a lot more money than Trump did on developing advanced military hardware. Is there a risk that America's proliferation of modern weaponry, which America would probably argue is there to be preventative, is actually egging on some of the West's foes to push further and further into weaponry that, well, it sounds like pretty scary stuff?
No, I would actually push back against that characterization. I mean, the Chinese have been expanding and spending well over 10% of at least publicly stated on their defense. And the more that you don't match their military strength when they do the force-on-force correlation, it makes it more likely that the Chinese and the Russians follow the same pattern, that they'll be prone to take adventurous activities like we saw in Georgia, 2008, Ukraine in 2014, and what we're seeing in the South China Sea since at least 2013 and 14. So no, the best way to ensure that you have a peaceful setting, or at least relationship with the Chinese and the Russians, is to ensure that you have that military to deter them. But it is a more, in modern warfare, this hybrid warfare, it's more than just hard military power that you also have to bolster. It's also your societies, your information, and your social media, and the information your public are getting that can inform and change the politics, which after all, that's really their target, is to change the policies in Washington and London and Canberra.
I mean, we've spoken a lot in the past couple of years about the roles that China and Russia are playing on the world stage. And it strikes me that if this is all part of power progression, that these two particular countries have also voiced what I'd say are aggression intentions, China regarding Taiwan, Russia regarding Ukraine. So what is the real risk of threats and development of technologies actually turning into some form of warfare?
Well, I think the first thing is that both Moscow and Beijing, they don't want to take on the US and the Western allies directly in a confrontation. They want to deter us with their military force and new developments so that our red line for kinetic action, our actual warfare, stays pretty high. so that they can continue to change conditions on the ground in the status quo. So as long as that stays the same, the likelihood of a war is actually quite less. And again, I come back to the conventional deterrence is the key of the whole picture.
But how much can we trust the idea that these countries wouldn't make a mistake in the heat of a moment? Because these weapons have the risk that if someone errs or gets the wrong impression, things could go catastrophically wrong. Is there any need for people to be building up a sort of Cold War-esque existential crisis when it comes to the advancement of warfare technology, or would that be a hyperbole?
No, so I would agree in part, especially with the Chinese. The Russians have not changed their strategic arsenal in a dramatic fashion as the Chinese have in just the last 12 months. And so that, on the Chinese part, is actually highly destabilizing the strategic deterrence. And we have not had any historical strategic nuclear deterrence dialogues with the Chinese. So they are, in many ways, a blank sheet. We don't know, we don't understand what their escalatory ladder is, and that neither do they of ours. So in that regard, in the nuclear ladder, that is something that is new, and it is very, very troubling.
When it comes to arms being developed, what sort of things are being worked on right now? I mean, I'm sure that if you know certain things, they might be classified, but we're talking about hypersonic missiles. Russia has been blowing up satellites in space. How important are these developments, and what sort of things can we expect to see over coming years and decades?
Well, there's two parts. One is the capability itself, and in both China and Russia, they both have had that capability for many years. The fact that they chose now, so the second part of it is, what's the message or their strategic intent of testing it or unveiling these capabilities now? And that actually is a political end. It's to shape or to dissuade the US, the UK, from being more present in Asia, in the case of China's recent test. Russia's test may be a predecessor to something, a move or an activity in the Black Sea or the Ukraine, which we have seen troubling buildup of troops along the border there in Eastern Europe and Russia that could signal that there may be an escalation of conflict there. So again, looking beyond just the specific test, but looking at it as part of a comprehensive competitive approach.
Brent, thank you so much for coming on today and giving us your expert insight into this. Brent Sadler, Senior Fellow for Naval Warfare and Advanced Technology at the Heritage Foundation. I now want to focus on so-called Havana Syndrome. Have you heard of that? It's a mysterious illness some believe could be a new type of secret warfare. It was first reported in 2016 by American and Canadian embassy staff in Havana, Cuba, and debates rage in intelligence circles over whether this is stealth sonic weaponry designed to fry the brain or the stuff of science fiction. With more than 200 US emissaries around the world claiming grim symptoms and reports of microwave trucks used against Indian troops in Kashmir, is it mass hysteria, or could this harrowing development actually be true? Well, someone who might know is neurologist Robert Barlow, who has co-authored a book on it and joins me now from Los Angeles. Robert, I've been fascinated by this ever since I first heard of it. Talk to us a little bit about it. What is Havana Syndrome?
That may seem like a straightforward question, but the reality is we don't have any acceptable criteria for the diagnosis. You could not get two people to agree on what exactly represents Havana Syndrome. There's a grouping of symptoms, but they're markedly variable. And with this outbreak that has occurred around the world, it has even become more vague as to what the syndrome represents. Most of these recent cases, we don't have details about exactly what people are experiencing, but clearly there is no consistent pattern that really would meet the definition of a syndrome. So that's a big problem. As how do you diagnose Havana Syndrome?
Is there any risk in your mind whatsoever that when people are reporting symptoms which they may equate with so-called Havana Syndrome, that could be true, and that there is technology out there that could induce such symptoms when it comes to using sonic waves or microwaves? Or, as your book describes, is this most likely to be a mass psychogenic illness because, frankly, it can't be done?
Well, when you initially see this type of an outbreak, you certainly have to consider all possibilities. Indeed, you certainly have to be concerned about some potential toxin or even a weapon, a mysterious weapon. But look, we have now had 5 years when this initially was observed. There has not been one bit of evidence for a weapon, whether it's a secret weapon or a sonic weapon, a microwave weapon. There's little reason to believe that you could make a weapon that could produce the syndrome that we're seeing. In fact, certainly experts in sonic weapons, microwave weapons have really questioned the possibility of a weapon producing isolated brain symptoms without really any objective evidence of brain damage, certainly without any damage to any other part of the person. And I think the real key is you have to look at this historically, how it began in Havana, and then as it's evolved, it's really hard to imagine someone or some country following our embassy people all over the world and using some kind of a weapon that would not be able to be observed by anyone.
Robert, thank you so much for coming on. I'm relieved that you don't necessarily think it's out there and people are being nuked, but it's fascinating stuff. Robert Barlow, neurologist and author, talking about Havana Syndrome. Well, joining me now is Isabella Kaminska, editor of the Financial Times Alphaville Markets blog. Isabella, how important is following the money when it comes to modern warfare?
Oh, I think it's very important because, in the age of disinformation, it's hard to keep track of what's really going on. But when it comes to capital market flows, that's reality. So if you see money flowing in and out of certain jurisdictions or into certain asset classes, that's a real tangible thing to focus on.
And when you're looking at those sorts of financial flows, who are the biggest threats to the West right now? Who's tooling up? Who really is developing capabilities?
Well, I think everyone's got their eye on the gas market at the moment because we're facing what is considered a bit of a deficit coming into the winter. And since it's gas, everybody naturally connects that to Russia. So Russia is currently embroiled in a bit of a pipeline controversy because there is a new pipeline called Nord Stream 2, which is supposed to go live. But it's there's a bit of resistance in terms of the regulation, and watch where the gas flows is very much on everybody's radar at the moment, whether or not this pipeline will go ahead.
So in terms of this is sort of power projection regarding countries like Russia and China economically, and Russia is essentially wargaming, trying to get that pipeline signed off with Germany, get it ratified, avoid having to pay a levy in Ukraine. And is that, do you think, all tied into what we're seeing when it comes to the Belarusian border, when it comes to Russia and, projection of military capabilities, such as blowing up satellites? Is it all tied into this sort of trying to destabilise the West and get a foothold of supremacy?
Well, it's impossible to really say. That's part of the whole point of hybrid warfare, which is the term that we're now hearing over and over again. And if you look at what's going on in Poland, certainly that term has now come to the forefront of the media sort of conversation there. So whereas before it was all very kind of subtle and we didn't know what was going on, now the emphasis is very much on hybrid warfare. And the whole point of hybrid warfare is actually to delay a recognition of what's really going on. So technically, by the textbook case of what it stands for, is delaying and kind of confusing the enemy so they don't really know they're being attacked. So is it a case of a strategic gas shortage in Europe this winter, which is being pushed strategically by Russia? Or is it actually the result of Russia being short of gas itself? We can speculate at this point, but until the money flows and we see what's going on, it's probably worth to watch this space.
And it says, if you from what you analyse and what you look into, where are the biggest threats to the UK at present?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm not a military expert, just to clarify that. But I think the biggest risk in the short term is definitely energy related, because there is a definitive shortage out there because we have become increasingly dependent on so-called liquefied natural gas. And since even if Nord Stream 2 goes live, it doesn't guarantee that extra gas will go into Europe and therefore also into the UK, because there is a potential limitation on the source point of the gas. So if we come to that crunch period, which will probably come not until February, because it's not until our reserves are really depleted that it becomes an issue, that puts us in a very precarious position, because if there's not enough energy, it's very hard to print your way out of that problem. It's a source deficit, which can have massive implications, as we've seen already with the petrol crisis, in terms of fertilizer and other sort of dependent and very essential industries.
I mean, without doubt, energy supplies give Russia significant leverage over the UK and Europe. But do you think we've been caught napping a bit when it comes to this? And our energy policy has not taken into consideration that we've become way too reliant on a state which we don't necessarily call a friend of ours?
Well, I don't think we've been caught napping, because I think that's been in the sort of debate for a very long time. We've had a very strong opposition in Europe to sort of investment and expansion of the Nord Stream pipeline, specifically because of concerns about increasing our dependency on Russia. So there has always been pushback. But something did happen like a few years ago where we essentially changed our sort of energy resilience planning, and we went into the net zero, for whether good or bad, I'm not here to judge, but the point is net zero does potentially expose us to increasing sort of fragility on the energy supply side, because renewables, as great as they are, they don't yet provide us with 100%, so-called what's the term? 100% resilient energy provision. So that's one of the issues.
And when it comes to China, and when we look at hybrid warfare, the economic element of that, so much stuff that we buy, that we use, that we depend on is now manufactured in China. Certainly they've brought up one of the world's biggest microchip companies in the UK. How at risk are we if we continue down that path of Beijing being the big sort of manufacturing powerhouse of the world to, again, being in the shadow of China? And if China wanted to flick a switch or pull a lever and suddenly become hostile, how much under threat would we be?
Well, I think China has very strategically positioned itself in many sort of rare earth resource materials specifically to corner them and ensure that even when we do transfer to renewables, we will be beholden to potentially another sovereign power like China, right? So we're currently dependent on Russia, but we move to renewables. Supposedly that's all about independence. But if China controls a lot of the cobalt market, not so independent after all. Another area that China dominates is in the solar manufacturing industry, where like 90% of silicon wafers that go into photovoltaic production, which are the solar panels, are made in China. This again is an example of how dependent we are on China in the future, even in a renewable framework.
Isabella, thank you so much for coming in to the studio and having this fascinating conversation with me. It's been an absolute delight.
No problem. Thank you.
Well, there we go. As we transition to the new world order, you've heard in this show what we've got to be looking out for. After the break, the funeral of MP Sir David Amos has taken place in his Southend West constituency. He was stabbed to death at a local surgery last month. I'll be joined by a man who knew him well, the Vice Chairman of Leigh-on-Sea Town Council. First, it's the weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. A taste of winter later this week, but for the time being, many places are enjoying plenty of late autumn fine weather. Sunny spells, showers for some, mainly around the periphery of the area of high pressure that is keeping things generally settled across the UK. But it's really into, well, the far southeast of England where we're seeing a steady stream of showers for Kent, 1 or 2 showers also for the rest of the day for parts of Norfolk and Lincolnshire, and that thicker cloud that we've seen through the day across northern Scotland continuing to bring some light outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Away from the cloudier areas in the north and the east, clear skies through the night and temperatures falling away, a touch of frost in places by the start of tomorrow morning. A few fog patches as well, but they won't last particularly long, and actually plenty of sunny skies once again. Northern England into the Midlands, Wales and the southwest. This area of cloud making an appearance, a bit more cloud across central and southeastern parts of the UK compared to Monday, and Thicker cloud also for southern Scotland, northern England, Northern Ireland. Again, those light showers continuing for the northwest of Scotland. But for most, it's another dry, fine, settled day, where we get some sunshine, feeling pleasant with light winds and highs of 10 Celsius. Into the evening then, clear skies coming and going across the southern half of the UK, and where we get those clear skies, some dense fog patches forming. Also a touch of frost. But towards the northwest, an area of rain arrives overnight. That rain pushing through Scotland as well as Northern Ireland as we start off Wednesday. So frost-free in the north, colder further south with that fog and low cloud as we begin things. It does brighten up a bit across England and Wales. The cloud lifts, the fog clears. But it stays cloudier, I think, in many places compared to, say, for example, Tuesday and Monday. By later this week, the weather turns windier, colder and much more unsettled.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back to the afternoon agenda with me, Alex Phillips. Now, in a few moments, I'll be speaking to the Vice Chairman of Leigh-on-Sea Town Council. Residents there spent the day paying their respects to MP Sir David Amos, whose funeral was held earlier today. But first, let's get the latest news headlines with Polly.
Good evening. As you've been hearing, mourners have been paying their last respects to the politician Sir David Amos during a funeral service and procession in his Southend West constituency. Sir David's coffin, draped in a Union flag, was carried to the church by members of Southend Fire and Rescue Service. The father of five was stabbed to death while holding a surgery at Belfair's Methodist Church in Leigh-on-Sea in October. The Home Secretary has today been saying there's no silver bullet for solving the migrant crisis. Priti Patel took urgent questions from MPs in the Commons over the increasing numbers of migrants crossing the English Channel. It comes after it was announced that more than 24,700 people have arrived in the UK so far this year. That's almost 3 times more than in 2020. And the Home Secretary's also announced who will lead the Sarah Everard inquiry. Dame Eilish Angelini QC will investigate her murder, which was by a serving police officer in March. Priti Patel says she hopes the inquiry will shine a light on the failings that led to Sarah's killing. And in the United States, 5 people have died and more than 40 have been injured after a car ploughed into a Christmas parade in the American state of Wisconsin. US police are investigating whether the suspect was fleeing another crime scene. An SUV broke through barriers in the city of Waukesha yesterday afternoon, hitting dozens of people, including children. And here, all new homes in England will have to have electric car charging points from next year. Boris Johnson has been speaking to business industry leaders at the CBI National Conference from the Port of Tyne in South Shields. New supermarkets and workplaces, including those undergoing major renovations, will also be forced to include charging points. Those are your headlines. I'll bring you a full news update at the top of the hour. See you then.
A private funeral service has taken place for MP Sir David Amos in his Southend West constituency, ahead of a service at Westminster Cathedral tomorrow. The father of 5, who was stabbed to death while holding a constituency surgery at Belfair's Methodist Church in Leigh-on-Sea last month, was a devout Catholic. I'm joined by a man who knew him very well, Councillor and Vice Chairman of Leigh-on-Sea Town Council, Keith Evans. Keith, you were at the funeral today. Can you tell us a bit about that service?
The service itself was very well attended. I think that they could have actually filled the church thousands of times over. It was very dignified, and it was a very, very respectful tribute to Sir David.
Running incredibly high. It was such a tragic incident. How has the town come together in the wake of the death of Sir David?
I think the town themselves are actually still reeling from it and actually can't believe it. It's almost one of those things that's like a bad dream, where people are actually thinking, is it true? I think today again brought that reality home, and people still are talking about Sir David. At Leigh Town Council tonight, there's an evening of reflection where obviously members of the public are going to come, those possibly that weren't able to get to the service as well. And I think even with your newsreel as well, there were just loads and loads of people on the streets paying their respects to him.
I mean, you knew Sir David well. Talk to us a little bit about the man, his character and his ambitions, and what motivated him as an MP.
Well, actually, I think there's probably far more people that would have known David a lot better than I did. But the strange thing is that once you met Sir David, you felt that you knew him. My mother-in-law used to look after his dog in the dim and distant past, but he was just such a personable character. I don't think people even realised at certain times what political party he represented, because he was just there for the people. He would remember a conversation possibly 2-3 years on. I've got personal experience of that, where he would always ask how my brother-in-law was, because he helped my mother-in-law and the family, and it was just something. And I've heard so many people saying that even 2, 3, 4 years down the road, he would remember and he would follow up just to make sure things were as they were.
He really did love his constituency and his job. What sort of legacy do you think he's now going to leave behind?
Well, obviously, one of his main legacies was getting Southend city status, so hopefully that will come. But I think the other thing is that his legacy, I think he's one of these people that will always be remembered. He was always there. He'd walk around the corner and all of a sudden he would be there. He was very much in the community all the time. And I think it's quite poignant this past weekend, where we've just had Remembrance Weekend, where Sir David, who was the patron of the Leigh-on-Sea Royal British Legion, and he would be there on the Sunday afternoon in St Clement's Church, laying a wreath and also doing a reading, having previously been at the main cenotaph in Southend, laying a wreath, and also over in Eastwood, which is a ward just sort of adjoining Lee and Belfast. So even as far as, I suppose, there's going to be the legacy that he's going to leave, I think, is things like where people, the shops, the woodcutters, just from where the church was, where he was actually murdered. He used to run a competition on that little parade of shops for them for the best dressed shop, and the winner would get a bottle of prized House of Commons. And I think the legacy of him will be that he'll always be remembered as the people's people. And I think somebody said today, some people don't even realise what political party he represented, because he actually represented the constituents.
He was actually an MP, wasn't he, for Southend West for almost a quarter of a century, and actually before that 14 years at nearby Basildon. So he really was almost part of the furniture of the community. Are there discussions about commemorating him in some way?
Yeah, there's all sorts of things being mooted at the moment. There's been suggestions that maybe one of the new pier trains be named after him, statues being put up, and I think the public themselves, he was just so loved by everybody that I think the public themselves are making waves as to what they actually want to commemorate him with.
Keith, thank you so much for coming and talking about Sir David today. That's Keith Evans, who's Councillor and Vice Chairman of Leigh-on-Sea Town Council. Still to come on the afternoon agenda, it's time to hear what you think about the 21st century arms race. I've been asking, should the UK be investing more in advanced weaponry? We'll be back in just a moment. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, how at risk is humanity from the rapid rise of digitisation? What of our agency, our identity and our independence in a world increasingly controlled by computers? Should we be excited, or perhaps should we be afraid? In her book, Tracy Fellows shows how our personal freedoms and individual potentials will be transformed over the coming decades. From health passports, biohacking and relationships with machines, to mind clones, digital voting and virtual legacies beyond the grave, we need to understand these vital issues today so that we might design the future of our identity tomorrow. Well, Tracy joins me in the studio this afternoon. Tracy, how does this rapidly emerging, rapidly changing digital world impact upon us as individuals?
Well, I think that's why I wanted to write about it, because I felt the most important fundamental thing is our identity. And every time we have anything to do with technology, we access anything or we want to interact or communicate, it's inherently now through technological tools. And actually, we're losing some autonomy. We're losing control of our own identity. So, you know, if it's my Twitter handle or a Facebook account or even a phone number, my identification belongs to the platform that's hosting the service. It doesn't belong to me.
There are a lot of people who would be fairly lackadaisical when it comes to privacy settings and, you know, now you've got the pop-up saying GDPR and, you know, tick this box to proceed. Most people don't read terms and conditions. They don't read privacy statements and they just think, well, everyone's at it. Everyone's on social media. That's the thing that counts. But in a dystopian future, what could that mean for us?
Well, exactly. It doesn't really matter until something goes wrong. When I was on Facebook, I couldn't log in. I lost my account because somebody had somehow hijacked it. And when I put my passport in to prove and verify that I was who I was, Facebook told me I wasn't me. So I think you have to extrapolate that out into other services. Say if in the future we are getting our welfare payments through this technology, we're using a platform, say we've got a central bank digital currency. It very much feels like individuals in the future are going to either have their access permitted or restrained dependent on their behaviour. And actually the technology that is giving you access, either with or without a government partner, can make that decision.
I mean, is the risk here that essentially shadowy figures in Silicon Valley and the AI they use to run their technology are usurping the position of governments, usurping the position of democratically elected leaders, and actually now exercise far more control over our virtual existences and behaviours, which actually sort of have a knock-on effect into the real world?
That's right. I think there was 20 years ago an idea that the internet was going to connect us all, we'd be interconnected and we'd have autonomy ourselves and we'd be in this utopian system. And actually what we saw over time was a monopolistic control and more centralisation around different aspects or offerings of the internet, whether it's a social media network or your location-based services. And what that's meant is that we've lost some control and they've gained a lot more control. And so what we need to get back to is more of a decentralised system, way of looking at the internet, where the user has control of their identity and control of their data to in effect, and actually can use it to verify themselves, authenticate themselves, go into a virtual reality. We've heard a lot about the metaverse lately, you know, control one's persona, avatar in the metaverse, and actually not be beholden to the things we should or shouldn't say or the behaviours we should or shouldn't do. According to a technology platform that really has no competition for us to go to.
Now, as a futurist, which can I confess, I think that's the coolest job on earth. I think that's brilliant. Are you excited about what the future may hold and your predictions for the direction of travel, or do you sort of approach the rest of the 21st century perhaps less trepid than other people?
I'm an optimist, but I now call myself an anxious optimist. So I think it's very good as a futurist to be prepared for all the possible scenarios. And actually, you're not really trying necessarily to be right, but you don't want to be wrong. So you want to have looked at all the possible futures and alternatives, not just the probable one that people think the future is going to pan out like. And so I am optimistic because I think, and certainly in the last 6 months, I think people are starting to be much more aware. They're doing their own research. They are looking at the terms and conditions and not just what that will mean in the immediate moment, but actually what that might mean in 5 years' time, 10 years' time. If you want, cognition, you're cognition enhanced, What are the terms of service that you're going to be signing up to, and could those change in the future? So I think people are becoming much more aware, and I think the tide's starting to change now.
It seems to me, I was born in the 80s, brought up in the 90s and noughties, and technology that we see today, it might have been spoken about or projected in a science fiction quality, but the rate of change has been enormous. Where do you think the next 5, 10, 20 years are going to take us?
I think there's an awful lot of work going on with brain-machine interface. There's advancements in neurotech, should we call it. So everything we're doing on social media and through media, we might in the future, 10, 20, 30 years, be doing much more mind-to-mind, so a kind of telepathy. Very much work going on with the thought control processes, so how we thought control objects. And of course, that's going to lead us to virtual skills, so that we can create our skills that are sent out in avatars to other places in the world, maybe even to space, and where we can go to perhaps dangerous zones that we wouldn't want to go to physically, and we actually carry out operations or activities remotely. And I think that's where a lot of it's going. And one of the things to watch out for there is the disconnect between physical reality and the fictional worlds that we're creating, and the disembodied nature of us that we are creating. And that's, I think, one of the things that I want to get people to think about. How do we integrate those selves together?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that actually, in terms of the lack of any physical immediacy. We already see how trolls on social media behave in a way that you just wouldn't do that in polite society. You wouldn't go up to someone in the street and say, oh, your voice is funny, you speak strangely. But people say all sorts of things on social media with impunity. Do you think the greatest risk of to humanity really is that dehumanising people by sort of mixing together the different mediums of what is reality and what is virtual?
It could be dehumanising us, or it could actually help when we get into these virtual worlds and we've got like 3D body scans and we've got haptics where we can touch things and feel things, and we have our senses back, which we don't really have on social media. That might be an advantage. We might find that we've got more of a character, more of a persona, and therefore we aren't feeling so endangered through our identity, and we don't need to overcompensate. So I think in the future, when we've got these virtual worlds, we'll have many more senses available to us, and we will relax a little bit about the communication between us. And then, sorry.
No, carry on.
No, I was going to say separately, then we have to think about what happens to our mind in these disembodied, intangible spaces. And definitely there's work going on to try and connect our brains. So if you're on the same server, you might be able to use a bit of extra space to increase your memory. Those sorts of things, and link with other people's minds and mental capacities. And that's got amazing opportunities for the way in which we think and ideate and create and innovate. So, obviously you need to put some guidance and frameworks around it, but it could be incredibly interesting and exciting.
Is there a risk that we're creating too much opportunity and too much of a range and too much choice with these constant pioneering innovations, where something that wasn't possible is now extensively possible, and the more we have possibility put in front of us, the more that we want? Every generation is slightly distrustful or nervous of the generation coming up underneath them and the innovations that they feel might be leaving them behind. But what we're about to face now is the sense of the digitisation or computerisation of humans themselves.
Yes, that's right. There is a theory, actually, that we will be using digital assistants much more because of this, because we'll be so overwhelmed with not just media, but tasks, decisions, things that we have to carry out in the everyday sense, that we will want to continue outsourcing more and more of it to a digital assistant. And it might be that the digital assistant has so much information about us, our profiles, our preferences, the way we decide, and it might have so much intelligence that actually it can kind of tap into another dimension, another realm in the world, and therefore be occupying a slightly different reality to the one we occupy. And once again, I sort of ask the question, well, how do we integrate those, like the extension of the self and the physical self? Because there's a lot of innovation and it can be quite overwhelming.
Paint me a picture now of Tracy and Alex in the nursing home in the latter half of the 21st century. What's our reality going to be like?
Gosh, I don't know. I think much of it's going to depend on how much wealth one has, because these services don't come cheap, and they won't come cheap in the future. They'll be accessed by people who have got the means to access them, have got those assets, and maybe for other people it won't be a possibility. But I think perhaps in the nursing home we will be having some neurotech which will be possibly plugged into, which will be reminding us of memories, possibly even manipulating our memories, possibly creating some new memories for us. I mean, we've seen Apple want to diagnose us for depression, and we've seen other technologies in Chile, actually. They're trying to pass a law, trying to legislate for anybody wanting to use neurotech where they manipulate people's minds and memories. And that's quite serious that that's going through their parliamentary system. So I think people are aware of this. But I imagine these kind of cognitive enhancements that improve the performance of a human and try to give them more longevity will probably enter the mainstream sort of 20 to 30 years from now.
Right, Tracy, I find it really chilling. We're going to need a whole new raft of legislation and regulation to protect our brains. Tracy, thank you so much for coming in today. I'm really, really enjoying the book, and it's a delight to be able to discuss it with you. Well, today on the afternoon agenda, we've been talking about the 21st century arms race, and I've been asking, should the UK invest more in advanced weaponry? And I've been joined by some really excellent guests on the programme. Former senior British intelligence officer Philip Ingram, MBE, says China is the country we should be watching.
China's been on a rapid programme over the last few years of professionalising their military, re-equipping their military with sophisticated capabilities, developing what is called power projection capability. So we've got submarines, we've got aircraft carriers, we've got marine capability, the ability to take Chinese influence, take it somewhere else in the world and project that power from a military perspective. That's the worrying bit. And then highly sophisticated and technical weapons, the rush into space and everything else. Now, from a US perspective, from an allied perspective, are we going to admit that we can see them whenever they're doing things and can track them as they're doing it? It's much better that we get out in the public domain that we can't see them. We don't know what's going on.
Well, if you are worried, Senior Fellow for Naval Warfare and Advanced Technology at the Heritage Foundation, Brent Sadler, says war isn't that likely just at this time.
I think the first thing is that both Moscow and Beijing, they don't want to take on the US and the Western allies directly in a confrontation. They want to deter us with their military force and new developments so that our red line for kinetic action, our actual warfare, stays pretty high so that they can continue to change conditions on the ground in the status quo. So as long as that stays the same, the likelihood of a war is actually quite less. And again, I come back to the conventional deterrence is the key of the whole picture.
Well, I hope that's reassured you somewhat. It's now time for you, the viewer, to have the final word on the 21st century arms race. John says, our enemy wants to do us harm, and already amongst us, we have little to fear from foreign armies in this country. The new warfare is a societal warfare. Jack says, yes, we need to invest with more military for the sole purpose of defence. Rich says, all this is immaterial, because as long as we keep buying Chinese goods, we're financing their goal of world domination. Jonty says, we're not a superpower. We don't need billions of pounds of nuclear weapons. Spend the money on something that benefits the people of the UK. Well, let's look at the result of our poll on Twitter today. We've been asking, should the UK be investing more in advanced weaponry? And 85% of you say yes, you bloodthirsty lot. 15% say no. I found it a fascinating show today. You, of course, have been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips, on GB News. I'll be back tomorrow from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. Coming up next, of course, it's the wonderful Michelle Dewberry with Dubes & Co. Have a lovely evening.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. High pressure is keeping things fine. During the next 24 hours for most of us, there'll be frost and fog, especially in the south on Tuesday morning, but replaced soon enough by sunny spells. Here's the area of high pressure. It's keeping Atlantic weather fronts and low pressure at bay for the time being, centred over Ireland, but around the periphery of that high, some additional cloud for northern and eastern parts of the UK. And you can see that across northern Scotland and increasingly Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland, northern England, seeing those patches of cloud overnight. more solid cloud coming into eastern England, perhaps floating into central southern England for a time. But away from the cloud, temperatures falling, a touch of frost, some fog patches to begin things on Tuesday. The fog gets replaced by sunny spells, and then for the vast majority it's another fine day. A lot of dry weather. Really the only noticeable rain will be across northern and western Scotland, where we keep those drizzly showers. But even the showers in Kent will tend to stay offshore, I think, throughout much of the day, so drier here. And for many it's bright, but I think there'll be areas of cloud floating about, so not entirely sunny. The best of the sunshine through these central and southwestern areas, temperatures reaching 10 Celsius. Into Tuesday evening, where we get those clear skies across southern parts of the country, with light winds as well. Some fairly dense fog patches will form. Could cause some problems on the roads first thing Wednesday. But away from the fog, areas of cloud here and there, and some more persistent rain arriving into Scotland, and by dawn, Northern Ireland as well. Now this weather front will sink south on Wednesday morning, so an hour or two of rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. It then arrives into northern England and North Wales by lunchtime. To the north, brighter skies, but blustery showers follow, and colder air digs south, so that these showers will be falling as snow over the hills of Scotland. Thursday and Friday bring with them plenty more cold weather and increasingly unsettled weather.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
I'm Neil Oliver. You can join me live every Saturday evening for opinions and discussions about the week's top stories. There's also a smattering of history and archaeology and features that define our great British Isles. You'll hear my thoughts unfiltered, as well as those of my guests, and we don't always agree. And we want to hear from you too. Neil Oliver Live, Saturdays from 7 on GBNews.